Oh, okay. Yay. Looks like we're here. Okay. So, uh, howdy, everybody. Ray Roberts here. I got a couple friends jumping in a little bit later. So, today's conversation, we're going to talk about your work. We're going to talk about your work, your life's work. Before I don't want to get reverb here. So, we're going to talk about your work, your life, your work life, and your life's work. That is the four things that are one thing, because if we remove you, none of them exist. Um, Directly, we're going to talk about those things today. So I'm going to give a little intro to start out with, and then we're going to kind of just jump into it. I'm going to go ahead and put an invite link into this for folks. I think most people who follow me through Facebook, so I'm going to go ahead and put the link there. So I'm just going to drop it into the I'll drop it into the thread here. So if you jump onto this live stream and you want to talk about your work, your life's work, or any of those things, that's where I would recommend you go ahead and get on in. Would love to hear from you. But that's the that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So let me go ahead and put this in so I don't forget. Okay, so there it is there. And yeah, let's go ahead and get on into it then. See my good friend here. He's in this as well. So let's go ahead. How are we doing, sir?
Hey man, how you doing?
I'm well. I'm well.
Good. It's good
So
to be here.
I wanted to kind of just get everyone a little bit into this because I don't know why I'm feeling good because it's Friday. So because I don't have work tomorrow, I'm feeling like this is for me at least going to be a little bit of time. So this will not be a 15-minute one. I think this is a topic that everybody could get into, and I'm going to dig into later about that everybody comment and some own personal struggles that I had even talking about this today. Because you might think about what's the issue about talking about your work and your life work and your work life and your life. So I want to dig into that. I really do, and share some of my own personal insecurities on just so everybody knows, me and Eric, we well, it's really Eric, but I'm like a I'm like a sous chef. He's the cook, but I'm
Yeah,
a sous chef.
yeah.
Um, so we have this thing where right now we have a men's group that meets every Saturday. So yes, you might be thinking I'm listening to this, I'm not a man. No, this conversation here is for anyone and everyone. But we do have a men's group that meets twice a month on Saturdays. Anyone and everyone's welcome. Just hit me up on the side. We will put you in there.
Yep.
Um, so we've been building the structure. So where we're at right now is me, me and Eric are both we're bookworms. We love books, so we have these bigger conversations, but we try to share the things we've gleaned from books. So we try to be your living cliff note. That's kind of the idea here, where we hope we sell the book so well that you go to read it. But the idea is, try to share the knowledge with you, because what is knowledge if you don't let it keep flowing, if you don't let it keep moving? So right now we're kind of working this thing out where our idea is one main book, because you can never just talk about such subject and only have one book, but one main book, and we talk about that once a month. So I'm going to try something I haven't done before. While I'm on here on my computer, I'm going to show you my floor, because I'm kind of, instead of trying to use computer graphics, sometimes low tech is high tech. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get in here on a third, on a me on a second device, but you'll see two of me on here. Let's see what happens.
You're gonna show them your room?
I was going to show them the floor. Let's see, because I have the books laid out just to kind of give an idea. Oh, it looks like it might be working. Let's see what happens. Okay. So, all right. So I'm going to kill my mic on this other one. I'm going to call this Ray Mobile. All right. So, okay. Let's see if it will allow me to turn the camera around. Okay, it won't. So I'll have to look over here. Let's see if we can pull this off. Let's see this here.
Oh, man.
Okay, so I just want everyone to first see the books that me and Eric have kind of been talking around. All right. So let's turn this around here. Okay. So these books are kind of the books we've been talking about. So today we're over here in Timothy Keller, Every Good Endeavor. That's where we're at. How am I coming through on volume?
You got a little far away, but it was okay. We could still hear you.
Okay, so I just want to kind of give everyone a glance where here's my idea. So down closest to me is literally closest to the person, the human. You have Bren Browns. I never know if I'm saying her name right. Daring Greatly. Then as you move up, you have books that talk about you interacting with other people. Then books to the right veer about your work and economy. Then as books veer to the left, it talks about things that are easier to engage, actually. So the books that are closer to you, they're actually harder to talk about. That's my mentality. So let's start with the easier stuff. A lot of you may have heard of Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers.
I just picked it up. I haven't read it yet.
And then you get over to Dan O'Reilly. He's an economist, behavioral economist, actually. Then it gets a little bit harder to talk about. Things like, do you have a right to be offended when people do things that are offensive to you? That's a hard thing because who has not offended someone, but we all are offended when someone does something to us, even if it's the same exact thing. Not a fun topic. Then the idea of guilt, coming in the idea of forgiveness. Murphy is actually a previous Surgeon General here in the United States. And his book is premised on the idea that when he was traveling the US, he felt that the number one thing that was afflicting people was loneliness. So he wrote a book as a former Surgeon General about loneliness. Think how crazy that is. Now, the last time we went live, you guys may remember we talked about conscious business down the middle. So the reason why I put that book in the middle is it's a lot about you, but also it's a lot about work. And then way up at the top, so I eventually will create a graphic so you can navigate this. Way at the top, you have a book called Black Swan.
Oh, I did take a picture of this the other day, so you could even put a still in your thing if you wanted to.
So yeah, so I just wanted to show that there. So the idea here is we'll be continuing to make this up as we go, but we'll be populating these books, and I will make a nice little graphic thing. I want to make something interactive, and what I'm hoping is, you maybe know of a book. Hopefully, it's a book I already read because I already have too many books I haven't read yet. And we can just have a community wiki of, it's not just about the books, but more the ideas, so the sharing of an idea. So even if it's not a book, I will completely accept you saying, have you heard of this religious leader? Have you heard of this philosopher? I want this to be interactive for everybody. But let's jump into today. So let me pick it up. Mr. Timothy Keller's Every Good Endeavor. Okay. So this book, yes, it is written from a Christian point of view. And coming back to my insecurity before, I started out as a straight business guy. I came out of the military. I went into the business world, and let me not say I was living as a Christian, but I was claiming to be a Christian. And I was actually, I wasn't ashamed of it, but I told myself that I did not want to make other people uncomfortable by saying who or what I was. So I've come a long way in the last 4 or 5 years, But I even found myself today, like, people see me as a guy for objective reality and rational thoughts. I don't want to turn people off when I tell them that useful things came from a Christian book. This is just me talking to myself. And I kind of had to hold myself accountable because that's literally what this book is about. It is about the idea of whatever your God is. Well, actually, he gets into proper gods, but we're going to leave that for later. But whatever your belief system is, whatever your definition of salvation is, if your work life is separate from your idea, your image, your mental perception of your life, you are going to find life a very conflicting thing to navigate. So we're going to dig into that today. Again, your work, your life, your work life, and your life's work. And as we go through some of the books you just saw real quickly, we'll probably be referencing them because, again, in real life, everything is everything. Things are connected. So even some of those books you just saw on the floor, even though the centerpiece book will be Every Good Endeavor, we're going to talk about how you can be working around a lot of people and be lonely. We're going to talk about how through your work, you can feel ashamed. Through your work, you can feel offended. We're going to engage all these things. So I'm going to show a quick little slide. This is basically a rough outline of the cliff noting of the books, basically. So I'm going to go throw this on the screen real fast. This is not to hold us to this 100%. Let's start out bigger, then we'll go from there. So this is at the end of the book, he has a structure, an epilogue structure. And what he talks about is, okay, you've now read my book of 272 pages. So I'm now going to put this cheat sheet at the end. And he goes from, you see it, you change from to a change to. Now, again, you might say to yourself, well, I'm not a Christian, so I don't have an issue with Christian superiority. I promise you, whatever you think you are, replace the word Christian with what you think you are, and this still applies. It definitely applies because at the end of the day, we're all serving some God, even if it's ourselves. So that is kind of a kickoff here where coming down number one, he talks about the idea of individual salvation. Like, so big picture, just as a quick, fast and furious bullet through the 10, then we'll get into them. That idea of what do you think it means to be saved? Do you think it, if you donate $10 a month at a local shelter, is that your salvation? If you help the old lady across the street, if you just simply don't do anything bad, is that your salvation? If you simply don't do bad things. And then starting out from what is your definition of being good, which kind of overlaps, what makes you a good person? What, even at your work, what makes you a good worker? Are you a good worker because you show up and do what you're paid to do? I think you can hear in my anchoring of my voice how I feel about such an attitude. Cheap grace. Again, someone might be listening to me and saying, you know what, I'm not a Christian, so I don't have to deal with cheap grace. I promise you now, especially to my liberal friends listening, there is a concept even outside of Christianity of cheap grace. So we'll get into that. Heaven up there, I think that kind of self-explanatory, the idea of you're not working for this world, or this world is not of consequence. You're working towards that next place. The idea of for believers that God is a value add, meaning here's my life and God makes my life better. So we're gonna talk about what you're really saying when you say that. Idols of the world, which is one of my favorite topics to dig into. So one of the books you just saw down there, it was literally called Gods at War. That book is solely about how when you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, it's usually because you're serving an idol. You're serving a false god, whether your false god is gambling or alcohol or yourself or money. It talks about that idea. Here's another one that, I don't want to get into it right now, but this is a big one too, in my opinion. Disdain for the world. And I wrote what the author wrote, but I almost wanted to add in righteous, or a perception of righteous disdain for the world. This concept that not only do you have disdain for other people, not only do you have disdain for society and, everything around you, but this idea that is founded in something truthful and good. So that's one I definitely want to dig into. Bowling alone. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, that lone wolf mentality. Now, I expect people to be listening in, and especially for people who know I'm a Black Lives Matter guy, I expect people to come at me, if not on this thing here, maybe later. And to you, I say, come at me, bro. We're going to talk about the issue of people mattering and why you need to change to institutions. I know that wording is going to be jarring, but let's get into it. We're all grown adults. Let's get her done. And then again, number 10, Christian superiority, where you may say, I'm not a Christian, so I don't have that issue. It's just the Christians. I promise you, my friend, whatever your circle is, there's an idea of superiority. Even if you're saying, I'm my own person, I can give you examples and we'll talk it out of filling that. I really wanted to make that fill in the blank superiority. And that idea of you deciding, whether you say it out loud or not, you deciding who has value in this world, who is worth saving, who is worth investing in, and you having the audacity, and that's what the word I'm going to use, you having the audacity to have a ranking for people based on your feelings about people. So I spit through that very quickly. Eric, we don't have to go in order, of course. I like more fluid conversation.
Sure.
Maybe we start with the bigger topics of wherever you want to do work or life. I think maybe work and work life might be easier to start with. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, in some ways you could start. Well, I wonder, it ends up sort of being both, but it actually shows the dynamic between work and life. If we go back to the original model, like say we even talk about something as esoteric as the book of Genesis, like Genesis is the Jewish account, the great tradition, the Hebrew account of the creation of the world. And what it describes is that first work week of creation and the community of the Godhead, let us, let there be light. And there's this conversation happening in heaven. And then as a result of their let us decisions, they create this whole world. And there's first the light, this sort of primordial light out of which everything comes. And then there's all these days. There's the setting in order, all of these different things. And then there's filling in each of these different orders, different kinds of life. And then ultimately creating, humanity. And then the last day is this day of rest where you enjoy all that you've been given, which is, in a sense, it's both the experience of, the gratitude for the work, and then, it's a community event too, that then gets you ready for the next work week in order to continue to be this creative, fruitful, multiplying people. So to me, the original work week says so much about who we really are and the relationship between work and rest, which is another way of saying rest is it's not just a relief from work, it's also gratitude for all the goodness that's been created. You see God saying every day of creation, he says that's good. And then ultimately he says of humanity and the communion of her humanity, very good. And then he wants us to enter into that enjoyment, because in some ways that's the purpose. Like the purpose is to receive the gift, to celebrate it together in community, and then set yourself up for, in that kind of grateful, joyful, creative reverie, if you will, of a relationship with God, the creator, in whom you're made. So that means you're going to be creative. Together, you go into the next week and you extend that creative community and that making, that ordering and that filling and that multiplying and that increasing into the next week. And that's kind of I think a nice little nutshell about some of at least the dimensions of work, but also even of calling, because one of the things that's embedded in this is the idea of calling. And really what happens from the beginning is that God has a desire to share his own, relational fullness. It just overflows, but the way he makes it overflow is by calling out. He says things and they happen. And then he addresses Adam and Eve and he says, I want you to be fruitful and I want you to multiply. And he calls them to do that. It's very similar to what Christ does with the disciples. He calls them into something bigger than themselves. He wants to enjoy it with them. He shares a lot of meals with them. And he also sends them out in that understanding then to share it with other people, to multiply that same kind of hospitality, that same kind of joy. And the creativity in his case, which has to do also with healing, because so much of our world now is broken. It's not paradise anymore, obviously. And so a lot of our work is about repair. It's about restoring relationships, restoring our connection to God. And so I think it's, in some ways, Ray, I imagine that we could end up every single one of these rows that we look at from Tim Keller's book, you could relate it back to that first creation week, and then how that ends up being echoed in many respects throughout the entire Old Testament and New Testament. And I think it continues to be sort of a pattern for our lives today, because work is it's about a response out of a relationship, out of a community, to a community, for a community, but not just for a community. It's to
hold on. I don't want to lose our people here.
Yeah.
And to the audience as well. So me and Eric,
yeah, we go crazy.
We talk about this stuff. We sit there with some good wine, we go into it. So hold us accountable if we go too fast or too deep, because we have a rhythm now. When you live life with people, you get a rhythm.
Yeah.
So let me try this. So the book is broken up into 3 parts. And the first part, he titles part 1, God's plan for work. But within that, those 4 chapters are this. Let's talk about the design of work, the dignity of work. Work is cultivation, and then work is service. So to your point, Eric, he opens up with Genesis, and I don't know, 270 pages. I boiled it down to my 4.5 pages of notes. So if someone else read the book, don't be offended that I missed something. But he opens up, in the beginning there was work. If you start with the story of Genesis, it opens up with work. Genesis 2:1-3. It's covered again. So throughout the stories in the Bible, work is commonplace. Now, one quote that I took from the author that really stuck out. I actually only have one quote from the first chapter from the author. He says, "Disordered hearts crave validation and affirmation." I think that stuck out for me because as a younger man, I was insatiable. Whether that was recognition, whether that was money, there was always something I was chasing. And I kept telling myself while I was chasing it, once I get there, then I will be good. And when I got there, everyone's clapping, everyone's celebrating. There was a moment of sadness, of despair, because it was never what I thought it was going to be. Never. I'm not exaggerating. It was never what I thought it was going to be. I remember I was going to Ranger School, and a guy who was like one of my mentors for that kind of life, I was like, yeah, I'm going to go and I'm going to graduate. And he's like, well, I just want you to remember something. Keep your head up when you graduate. And I said, what do you mean keep my head up? When I graduate, I'm going to be the happiest person ever. And he said, no, you're not. He goes, because like all of us, you're going to go thinking that it's going to make you a better man, a different man. And you're going to be sitting there on graduation day knowing that you're the same man. So that's what he said to me. And I was like, okay, whatever, dude, whatever you're saying. But I will tell you this right now. The day I graduated from Ranger School, that was a very depressing day because I was sitting there knowing I'm the same guy. Despite any people that got tricked, despite any people that are thinking otherwise, I'm the same man. And I know a lot of my voicing in this conversation can be towards men, but this is not just for men. It's just normally when I'm engaging in these conversations, I'm talking to men. So bear with me. I find a lot of men that I engage on these conversations. First off, men with the courage to engage in these conversations. This is pretty prevalent. This idea of chasing that next goal, fighting that next dragon, that next step, that next promotion. And you get there, and what hopefully you realize is you're trying to fill a hole in your heart with things that can never fill it. Money guys who take an honest second to have a real conversation with you, they know that there is no amount of money that makes you good. Another quick little story. I remember I was working at a car dealership out in Florida, a young guy. And I remember telling, when you work at a car dealership, just a whole bunch of guys smoking and joking, waiting for that next person to come on the car lot. And I remember saying, man, if I'm ever making $4,000 a month, my life will be set. I will want for nothing. And all the older guys just started laughing at me. And they said, yeah, give us a call when you make $4,000 a month. It is just one of these things where when you base, this is my opinion now, when you base your value off of being validated by the world and being affirmed by the world, even when they give it to you, you realize it doesn't mean anything. So that was the one quote that stuck out for me. And I'll just say two quick. So there's a German philosopher, Joseph Pieper. Pieper. Yeah, sorry. He had two quotes that he put in the first chapter from Joseph. So he writes this. Joseph argues that leisure is not the mere absence of work, but an attitude of mind or soul in which you are able to contemplate and enjoy things as they are in themselves, without regard of their value or their immediate utility. And I will add popularity, not that Pieper needs me adding words for his words. He continues, the work-obsessed mind, as in our Western culture, tends to look at everything in terms of efficiency, value, and speed. And you're gonna see this coming back later in our conversation. When you only treat a human being, when you only treat an employee, when you only treat a worker, only in terms of their efficiency and their value and their speed, I argue it's not possible to respect a human being as a human being. I'm gonna put that out there now. If the only way you see humans is in terms of their efficiency and their value and their speed, Amazon, you can't see human beings as human beings.
Yeah.
I'll give the other Joseph, then I'll be good for this part. This is an actual direct quote from Pieper. Leisure is the condition of considering things in a celebrating spirit. Leisure lives on affirmation. It is not the same as the absence of activity. It is rather like the stillness in the conversation of lovers, which is fed by their oneness. So just think about that idea of when you think of leisure, a lot of people think leisure means I don't have to work. I'll tell you this right now. I'm not an old guy. I'm not the oldest guy, but some of the most miserable men I have ever met were men who spent their entire work life talking about retirement. And then they retired and they had no clue what to do with themselves. Absolutely miserable.
They usually die really rapidly as well. from what I understand. I mean, I don't know if that's a real, but that's the sort of the anecdotal thing you hear, sadly, is the guy that worked his whole career thinking, I just got to go a couple more years and then finally go to the golf course. He can work on his hobby or whatever it is. But the next thing you hear is it wasn't long before he left this world.
So not only do you not, so as we go through this, let's just say it now, not only should you try to find your value in your work, neither should you try to find your value in not working.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, going into the second part, there is a dignity to work. Work in itself is dignified. So
wait, can we slow down just one sec?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to tie what you were just quoting from Pieper back to some of the things that I was saying, which is that I think the issue that the kind of dark side of not seeing work in light of leisure, meaning work has to be more than just for production. Work has to be more than just for achievement, right? It has to be more than just the accolades and the applause that you get. Because once those things die out, once the curtain closes, there you are again. And so something has to be higher. Something actually has to be bigger than that, and giving a purpose to the work and giving a meaning to it, no matter what kind of work it is. And it has to be for, I think, even relationships. And you can start with your close relationships. Like a lot of us understand that we work because we love our families. Obviously, we work because we need to eat and have a roof over our heads and be clothed, etc. But we also work because we love. A mother makes her meals because she loves her children and her husband, hopefully. And that is a purpose, and it's a relational purpose. It's a community purpose. And it started in community too. So that's one thing. But I also think it's for that celebration of life and enjoyment of life together that you do it. And ultimately, I would even say it has to go higher than that, because unless you have a hope that's higher than that, even that might be difficult. Frankl talks about that. Viktor Frankl, in his Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about the values that are longest lasting. So like you've got experiential values. I want to have fun. I want to just go out and have fun. A kind of version of life that's about entertainment and satisfaction, and it is, or just experiences, like an achievement experiences, like you graduated from your Ranger School, Ray, and that's a huge achievement, and it's a great experience. But experiences come and go, and then there's achievement values, the rewards that you can get on top of that, the creative values, like what are you making out of that? It's kind of like that, but it's a little bit different from just achievement. It's creative values, but all those things end too. And the one thing he said that they could not take away from him and everybody else was what he called attitudinal values. And those things are the things that are so high that even if you're, as he and his fellow Holocaust prisoners were facing, walking to in some cases, the gas chambers, it always went back to, am I oriented to something like despair and purposelessness? Or am I oriented to a good that's high enough that I live in the light of that, even if things are really dark here? Even if things come to an end here, is there something even higher than that that gives me light for every single minute of my life? So when the curtain closes, I still have that. What is that? I think that's in some ways, the design of work has to be related to these much higher permanent things. Otherwise, if your life is all about stuff that comes and goes, that's when you're left kind of like, oh, what's going to happen now? What else is there? Is that it? I worked my whole life for this and that's it? So I do think it's about these higher value things, these relational things, and even the ultimate things of what you and I would say have to do with God. So that to me, like if you start there, then I think then it becomes much easier to talk about the dignity of work within a right frame, within a frame actually that sets off work in the proper way, in a way that doesn't leave you in the lurch. It actually gives it even more meaning. So in some ways, I would say one of the first things I would say is work without a higher meaning that can empty itself out pretty quick. That's what you see in Ecclesiastes. But work in light of higher meanings, that is really even more potent, more purposeful, more meaningful, more delightful. And even little paychecks related up to these higher values become more enjoyable, I think. So and then,
he structures the bigger thing where he starts with the original plan for work.
Yeah.
He then talks about what you're engaging on, and chapters 5 through 8, where that part is called Our Problem with Work. Basically, what went wrong. So, you know, what you covered there, you basically just hit 5 through 8, where chapter 5 is titled Work Becomes Fruitless. Chapter 6, Work Becomes Pointless.
Yeah.
Chapter 7, Work Becomes Selfish. And in chapter 8, Work Reveals Our Idols. So just trying to go from memory from the things you just touched on, working backwards.
Yeah.
He quotes a French philosopher, Luc Ferry, who was a non-believer in God, but he still argued, and I quote, "Everyone seeks some way to face life with confidence and death without fear or regret." So that idea of you want your life to have purpose. But he continues on with the idea of the types of idols that distract us through work. So he had 3 categories: corporate idols, which is rank, status, title, salary.
Yeah.
Cultural idols, which he actually talks about reason and individualism. He talked about these idols of, I'm a one-man army. I'm a special guy. I don't need nobody. And then he talks about traditional idols, family, race, and nation. So he dug into how he gave examples of Wells Fargo, when they had to pay $175 million in fines for very lucratively, they were charging African Americans and Hispanic mortgage users higher rates on their mortgages than white people with the same exact credit score. Bank of America and SunTrust did the same thing. He even gives the example of the Murdoch family, you know, the newscorp.com out of UK. He talks about how there's this one point where the brother, he said in front of a group of people, and I quote, "The only reliable and perpetual guarantor of independence is profit." A couple years later, the company would have a phone hacking scandal that would rock the company, and his sister would go before an audience and she would say, "What my brother left out was profit without purpose is a recipe for disaster." And we've seen this, Enron. There's so many examples of when you give people goals and they're not tied to, he says purpose, but I'm gonna go deeper and say values. When you give people goals and they're not tied to values, you usually get unintended effects, unintended outcomes. Whether it just hurts you or hurts yourself and others. What do you think about that one?
Oh man, I 100% agree. Yeah, I mean that's I think a real profit orientation is a very short-lived proposition. I think you can, if you do one-time sales, maybe you can get away with that. But even dealerships in the long run, if they really want to be a dealership, like a car dealership and a community, and they treat every sale as like the one-time sale so they can use all of their manipulative tactics, in the long run, that's going to destroy the business because you're not caring about the community when you do it that way. And I also believe that what she's probably alluding to is the fact that if you treat somebody else as an ends to your means and you're as a means to your end, and your end is to fill your pocketbook, then I mean, you've just really gutted yourself as well. So not only are you robbing them and treating them as objects, whenever you do that, you've just evacuated your own sense of personhood. So
Two quotes here. One's from a Yale philosopher, Nicholas Wolterstorff. He observed that modern culture defines the happy life as a life that's going well, full of experiences and pleasures. He says, rather, you look at your ancients, your old school Greeks and Romans, they defined a happy life as a life that was lived well. Character, courage, humility, love, and justice. And you do see this a lot where people will proudly say, don't buy your children stuff, buy them experiences.
Yeah.
You've seen this. This is the new cultural idol where, as if it's different, instead of getting my kids stuff, I'm going to get them a whole bunch of experiences, and that is better and different. So he kind of needles at that concept of it's not really better. Again, if those experiences are not tied to something, if you're just having the experience for the sake of having the experience. He even talks about capitalism today. He says, again, actually, you said it first. His quote is, people need something bigger than themselves to live for, because modern capitalism is no longer simply a useful instrument for the distribution of goods and services. It has become an absolute idol. Even in America, he points out that capitalism does things that actually are contradictory to the very virtues that capitalism was founded on. Capitalism is supposed to be this idea of just distribution, bringing everyone up. But we are seeing money in capitalism being used to enslave, to keep people down, to control others, to hurt others. This is not the original intent of capitalism, which is why today you see this movement here. I'll just speak for the US here in the left. Your AOC and your liberal side is like, hey, we don't think anybody should have more than a certain amount of money. Now, it's easy to dismiss them as whacks for certain people, but they are not completely crazy. I take that back. They are not crazy at all for noticing how this version of capitalism, what it does to people and what it does to society. It is not distributing things for the betterment of all. We're getting to a hyper capitalism, a very, it's almost like a cancer where it is eating families. It is eating cities. It is eating, you have people now with so much money, they can literally destroy communities. We're watching this, where before maybe we didn't notice it in the 60s and 70s, but we can now see it with today's technology. You can watch communities become destroyed because of money.
Yeah. Yeah. The moment you turn the profit motive into the number one thing, the more dehumanizing it is. I mean, you and I both worked in big business, and particularly if you're traded on Wall Street, the quarterly earnings drive and the promises made to Wall Street and the trajectory of growth always ascending at a pretty steep curve, it can be really brutal and it can be really dehumanizing. And also it ends up creating incentives and pressures to treat your clients and your customers the same way too. And and I agree with you. I think that the best of capitalism was back when you had somebody taking some raw materials or some various kinds of services and maybe putting them together in a new way. And it's a kind of a creativity that comes from recombining things, and you're bringing something out that's never been there. And it so expands, it almost becomes like a blessing to people, and they do compensate you for it. And then you invest that in other kinds of creativity. But what's it for? It has to be ultimately for a relationship. I started in a relationship. So I think, yes, it's about your family, but it's never, ever just about your family. It has to be about all of your constituents, all of the larger community that you're a part of. And I do think there are examples that are contrary to Murdoch, where you've got people who have made a lot of money and they are reinvesting it in good ways. I mean, I don't like everything about Bill Gates, but I admire the way that he's taken a lot of his money and tried to do it in things that bring, different kinds of healthcare benefits to people, for instance. So I think it has to be about these higher values. Otherwise, it becomes very usurious. I mean, you really are using people. And in some cases, you might be abusing people for the sake of profit, which is where like the sweatshops come in. Or you might be destroying a small community business just to grow your market share for Wall Street. And, unless antitrust law comes in, you're going to really hurt communities. So that there is a way in which capitalism can get really unfettered, and it can move away from that very creative, life-giving, community-oriented kind of capitalism, which I would argue is the heart of capitalism. I share a quick story too. I think what you end up doing, instead of capitalism bringing value, an additional value that yes, you get compensated for, and you can share in different ways, that actually improves the whole community. I think a lot of capitalism is depriving people of different kinds of value. Do you know who J.I. Packer is, Ray?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So Packer, he just passed away, and this is why it comes to mind for me. Many years ago, I was having breakfast with J.I. Packer and one of the senior editors at Christianity Today, who is a friend of mine, and we were talking about the blind spots of Christianity over the centuries, and then those are easy to pinpoint, right? I think they're easy. I mean, most people would say that like, man, what were they thinking? The Crusaders? I mean, how is that like Jesus? Or how about the Inquisition, or some of the really superstitious practices, like thinking you can buy your way into heaven? What was going on there? And, some of the wars that are justified in the name, all kinds of stuff. And the combining of power and money with the church. And we were talking into that with J.I. Packer, and he's a really thoughtful theologian. So my question to him was, well, so what, man? What is it right now? Like, what's our blind spot right now? I just graduated from the University of Chicago Business School. So I was like a total capitalist, and I'm still a capitalist, right? But I believe it can't be unfettered. It has to be some kind of a managed capitalism in light of higher values. And so he said, he thought for a little bit, and he said, oh, well, I think it's private property. I'm like, what? What do you mean private property? Like, somebody should come up, like it's, what is it when your like farm is in an area where they want to have a highway and they take it over? Is that what you're talking about? You're like, everybody just does that? And he says, oh, no. That's not exactly what I mean. But this idea that you have this property and it's yours, just yours, in privation of everyone else. And he says, that's not how even non-Christians have thought about it historically. There's this idea that if you even had land, you were holding it as a steward. Even kings and kingdoms would understand that it was held in as a stewardship for the larger community. And this idea that it's yours, as in me, mine, and not yours, to your exclusion, is where he felt like at some point we're going to look back on this as the church and say, our conception of private property really got kind of screwed up. Now, does that mean that you don't have something proper to you that you're responsible for, like your own home, your own body? He wasn't saying that. But he is saying our wealth and our earning potential and our creativity, it can never just be about me, and it can never just be about us. Certainly not if it's going to be Christian.
So I want to come to that at the end. I want to pick up on some things you said there. So actually, it's on my mind, so let's just get into it now. So at the end of the book, they talk about, so what is yours? He basically tells you the whole time that you have no right. Your work is, like, he talks about how you don't work for the community. You don't serve the community. You do the work. You expect nothing in return. Your work serves the community. And he goes through how if you have this attitude that you are doing it for the community, you will wake up and find yourself thinking the community owes you something. And now he talks about why this is dangerous. So you need to do your work for the glory or just the sake of doing work. Do something for the sake of doing it.
Again, that goes back to the other thing that I started with, which is gratitude. It's like, oh, this is so good. We've been blessed with a gift, even the gift of having like your capacity to achieve so highly that you could graduate from Ranger School is a gift. And the gratitude that says, well, I received this and I'm so grateful for it, that in that spirit of gratitude, you become generous. And that to me is the real meaning even of being a generation. It means that you've been generated by somebody else. Like we all have had mothers and fathers all the way back to God. And that means you're a gift recipient, and then a gift recipient that's meant to pass it on. You're supposed to share it with the next generation. You're supposed to share it with your neighbors, is how that was the very next thing. Like, first, gratitude and love of God, because he's the generator of everything, but then also loving your neighbors. It's a generosity that overflows. If you are a grateful person and you're truly grateful, you don't take the gift for granted. You actually offer it up to God in thanksgiving, and you offer it out to the community in generosity. And that's what being fruitful and multiplying really means. It's very meaningful when you put it in that context of having received a gift that you then cultivate and then share the bounty. That's meaningful. That's celebration. That's festival.
So he, because you're kind of going through and you're like, okay, nothing's for me. It kind of like, okay, nothing is for me. I can't take anything as my own. So at the end of the book, he gets into something that is yours. He talks about the Sabbath. So a quote here, he says, Sabbath is a declaration of your freedom. It means you're not a slave to yourself, your culture, your family, your school. Sabbath is a disciplined and faithful way to remember that you are not the one who keeps the world running. Yeah, that was my favorite part.
That's so good.
You don't keep the world running, he continues, who provides for your family. You're not even the one who keeps your work projects moving forward. And then he really needles in. Entrepreneurs find it especially difficult to believe this. They have high levels of competence and very few team members. If they don't put in the hours, things don't get done. It's even harder for them to realize that the world does not revolve or require them to keep moving. And so he actually says he kind of feels bad for entrepreneurs because it's harder for you to see the truth that no, the world doesn't require you. And that's why, and I am guilty of this myself. It is harder for people, or not. My point is, it's difficult for people to realize that Sabbath, if you truly care about the world, if you truly care about your family and the people around you, you take rest. You do self-care. I, again, run into many people, including myself sometimes, who run themselves ragged. And when you say, why don't you take a rest? No, I can't. I have responsibilities. It's a discipline to say, I am taking a rest because I have responsibilities.
Well, yeah. And I also think it is a kind of ingratitude, isn't it, to not take a rest, because you can never really, you can't be grateful for something that you don't actually savor. If you've not tasted the food, then you really haven't appreciated. And gratitude includes appreciation. I think too, the other aspect of the Sabbath is not just it's the cap of the last week. It's the finishing touch on the last week in the form of celebration and thanks. It's also that space of unoccupied, not preoccupied time that can begin to become reverie. If you look at all of the most, I would say almost beautiful parts of capitalism, they come out of creative minds. Like I read a book many years ago called, was it Chaos Theory? But it was basically about all the chaos theorists and how all their breakthroughs, almost every single one of them, their breakthroughs, which were so creative, they were discoveries, but they're very creative, were when they were walking along somewhere beautiful. Like I remember one of the first guys to discover fractals as part of chaos theory, that there's this hidden order in the middle of chaos, was a guy who was walking behind a stream that had little eddies and swirls in it. And then just all of a sudden it went off in his head that, yeah, that's chaotic, but there's an order to it. And so then he had this inspiration for how to describe that. But it happened in reverie. So that's what I'm saying, is that I think Sabbath is this time when you're creating a space in time in which you give thanks and you enjoy. And you also then can begin to turn your mind to, what is that next thing? I talked about the next week. What is that new thing that could be called forward? That breakthrough that might be given because you've actually let yourself back away from it. You're not crunched down and clamped down on it so hard that you've just hit the wall. And you've now opened up your mind to really begin to see and appreciate and discover and create. And that, I think, is this really cool. We should spend a whole time talking about Sabbath, because I think it's one of the most powerful aspects. Let me say one other thing about Sabbath right now, because I think it speaks to something else you were saying. And in the Old Testament, it said, okay, Israel, you're about to go to war. Every man of a certain age, they could be called up for war, except if they've just gotten married or they've just built a house. And the way that the Hebrew people understood that was, we don't go to war just to be great warriors. Actually, we go to war for what's just, and we go to war because, there's been an attack to protect, right? So the meaning of Israel itself was in Sabbath, and in that context, because those were considered sort of Sabbath excuses. Well, because we're about home. We're actually about a marriage, which is a creative context for more children, more generations. And we're supposed to be a light to the nations, right? So there was a way in which Israel's meaning was way bigger than just being the greatest nation or being able to win a battle or something like that. Everything has to have a higher meaning. Otherwise, it becomes servile. And otherwise, you start using people, objectifying them, just like what's his name did for, when he said it's about profit. What's his name?
Oh, Murdoch. Rupert.
Yeah.
Rupert's son.
Yeah.
So I want to bring it back to where, because we've been talking about where we were talking about where you should have started. So we talked on that a lot. We talked about where we should end up. But most people today, they're in the middle of the book. They're in the place you don't want to be. So I want to finish up with the idea of work being selfish. So there's a part where he has his quote where he says, Pride does not get pleasure out of having something. This is actually a C.S. Lewis quote from Mere Christianity. Pride does not get pleasure out of having something, only out of having more than the next man. We say people are proud of being rich, proud of being clever, or looking good, but they're not. They're proud of being richer or cleverer or better looking than others. It reminds me of, in that book, Dan Ariely, Predictably Irrational. They did a study where if they found that if you told a person they're going to get a 20% raise out of the blue, they're happy as anything. But if you then tell them that everyone else in the company is getting a 50% raise, they're now upset.
Yeah.
So it kind of doubles down on this idea that you're not happy you have $50,000. You're happy because you have $50,000 and other people don't. That's selfishness. And he even ties it back to the idea of status is not supposed to be for you. And when it is, you're you're a miserable person. He talks about Esther. Esther, long story short, for those who don't know the story, she had it pretty good. And she was faced with a choice, though, where, other people did not have it as well. And she was asked, hey, can you do something about this? Because other people are going to be hurt. And the story is about her doing the hard right and putting herself in harm's way, even though she was in the palace. And the quote is, if I perish, I perish. This idea of you're not in a position of grandeur, of respect. You are not voted in the office for you. In fact, the higher you go, the more bosses you have. I don't know who I heard that from, but I heard someone say that. The higher up you go, the more bosses you have. And again, one of these pitfalls that society puts us into is the higher you go, the less bosses you have. But if you think about that, every boss you've had that lived that way, or every boss you had that managed that way, you were not happy to have them as a boss. You never were. So that idea of that's an idol. That's a default where some of us, if we're honest, our work has become selfish. We talked about the idols, so we covered that one, and I want to come back to the other two of why and how your work becomes fruitless, and why and how your work becomes pointless. So let's start off here because it's come up a couple times and I want to stick it in. So I think most people have seen Amadeus, the story of Mozart and what's his name?
Salieri.
Salieri.
Yeah.
So he uses this in the book to talk about Salieri. Salieri was no slouch, but he wasn't a Mozart. And this fact that even though he had a good life, he let's just say even from beginning to end, he lived a better life than Mozart did. He definitely lived a better life, but it wasn't enough. And it wasn't enough because he couldn't accept the fact, and this is for all of us here. First off, your work will always fall short of the glory of God. Remember, Salieri was a Christian. These were Christian times. So even when he wrote and he talked, he's like, I want to do this for God. First off, you need to get it in your head. Your work will always fall short of glory. That's one. Two, you need to accept the fact that just because what you're doing doesn't completely fulfill you doesn't mean it's not what you're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard one because the world tells us that, your work should be satisfying for you. You should get everything out of it. I find myself sometimes wondering, is this the place I'm supposed to be? But in all honesty, and he goes deeper into this. He says, here's a quote from Timothy Keller. Nothing in this world is sufficient basis for a meaningful life. Now, I'm going to stop there for a moment because I tried that earlier with some people and they jumped on me. There are some things in your life that are necessary, but we need to understand the difference between necessary and sufficient. You can have things that are necessary, but they are not in themselves sufficient. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go back to what he said. Nothing in this world is a sufficient basis for a meaningful life. If we base our lives on work and achievement, on love and pleasure, on knowledge and learning, our existence becomes anxious and fragile. I really love that part. Our existence becomes anxious and fragile because life is life, and there's always going to be something threatening that foundation of your life, and death inevitably strips us of everything we hold dear, if that's what you hold dear.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right on. I think that's really good.
That despair of, people are droning on, they're just working. And I'll tell you, I read this years ago before all this stuff that's happening right now. So, I'm a underliner and a highlighter. So I was able to go through these 270 pages in I'd say 2.5 hours and put together my notes. So, but reading it again, it was like, wow, this really is not dependent on a period of time, because I see right now in society, we have people saying, for example, Black Lives Matter, but we have people who are not, they don't understand what that means. Let's just keep it simple. They don't know, what does that mean when Ray is saying that to me? What does that mean? I don't bother people. I go to work, I can't even get respect at work. And now I get off of work where I don't get respected. And I got Ray jumping up in my face saying Black Lives Matter. What is going on? So Timothy Keller, he really tied this in a way that I plan on reusing a lot. He says this: work feels alienating because of all the injustice and depersonalization ever present in all social systems made by man. If certain humans, and these are my words, if certain humans are not treated as humans, how could you ever expect your work to be treated with value? We can't even treat humans with value. So why would you expect your actions to be treated with value? So I plan on using that going forward to tell people, my fight is your fight, because my fight is let's call it the outer gates, the outer walls, because that's where you want to hold the fight. Because if they don't respect my life or even the life of another, they're coming for your work, if not your life. They're tied. You can't expect a person who doesn't respect the basic sanctity of life to give you credit for your actions. And
Yeah.
reading him do that, I never heard anyone say it, but I'm going to be saying that a lot, that you should expect the world to alienate you and to not give you credit if they alienate other humans and they don't give humanity credit. I never heard anyone before tie how we treat people to how we treat people's work in that fashion before. So he tied that all under work becomes pointless. So now what's the hopeful part? How do you fix it? He says, start with yourself. Everyone needs to work out in clear personal terms how their work serves the world. So coming back to your comments about capitalism. Today, capitalism has become, do you make money? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Capitalism was originally meant to be, do you build value? Yes or no?
Right.
So if you're making money, but you don't know how you build value, you can't answer this question. You can't tell me in clear personal terms how you serve the world.
Yeah. And I mean, you could also just take it way back again to the beginning and say Adam and Eve were called to extend the garden. That's what it meant to be fruitful and increase. Well, what does that mean? That means you extend some kind of an order and a place of cultivation, a place of safety from wild beasts. You create a sanctuary, but it's a temple, it's a garden, it's beautiful, and you extend that order out into the world, and you're constantly converting chaos into beauty. And if if it's about you, it's just about padding your wallet or something like that, then you're kind of missing the point. I also think there's ways in which we measure life. A lot of this is about measurement. Like, so what's the meaningful measure to you? That will often tell you what your idol might be. For whatever reason, we inherit idols. Like, so if you grew up in a family where achievement academically was held in high regard, you're probably going to have an idol in proving your intellectual chops and going into really heady, professions that do that over and over again. And that could sort of be your family idol. But I think what you see in, like, I was thinking about Mother Teresa and some of what you were saying. Mother Teresa, we often think of her as this person who's so kind, so compassionate, and man, did she help all of these poor people across the world. And the numbers of lives that she touched, and she began doing things in Calcutta that nobody was doing. People were just dying in the gutters. And so she made a real, tangible, this world impact. And that was inspired by God. It was inspired by this higher reality. She did all that when she herself felt so little, because she was in what they call the dark night of the soul. I would suppose maybe some psychologists would say, oh, she was probably depressed. She couldn't feel joy in life. But she was such a loving person, such a kind person. I mean, people felt like they were in the presence of such kindness and love with her that they felt like they were in the presence of God. And so she grew this mission over her entire lifetime. And there were many moments where she would even turn away money, or she would not get money because, well, nobody gave money to this particular endeavor. And she would be relaxed about it. She would say, well, God must not want to do this right now. And it's all about God. It's not about me just getting as many. She says the world doesn't need another non-NGO, like a non-governmental organization. It needs to be a place that receives care and love. And she would say in the presence of God. And so her measurements were so different. Her measurements weren't her feelings. Because otherwise, if that was the case, she would have stopped a long time ago. It wasn't how many sites for her mission that she established, because sometimes she couldn't get the money. And sometimes she would say no, because she wasn't allowed to express the love of God while she's doing it. She wasn't going to do an NGO. So for her, she shows us how our measurements are so important. And you can even say about Christ's life. I mean, it was a short ministry, 3 years long. Peter came after him because he was He was saying he was going to go to Jerusalem and die. And you could say, whoa, what a waste. I mean, spilled blood. How wasteful is that? And yet Jesus is so loving. He points us to something so beautiful that it's more important than death. It's more important than life than death. You know, it's in fact, it becomes the source of life because it's resurrection. I mean, the love is so strong, it conquers death and becomes resurrection. That's how important, you know, that transcendent was for him. But it looked to everybody at the beginning like a waste. We can't measure it the way the world measures it. Otherwise, we dehumanize ourselves.
I want to segue from that. Mother Teresa was not really a segue. I want to continue it to a part of the book where he, let's just say he beats up on our bleeding heart friends. So let's just talk about that. So he goes in with the question of who's the better person? The person who goes to business school and makes a ton of money, or the person who works at the nonprofit? His point in saying this is when you don't have something outside of yourself as a compass, you'll find a society that we have today that automatically the kid who goes to Harvard and gets their MBA, they're a schmuck and they're a dirtbag. And the kid who graduates from college with a sociology degree and goes work in a sociology department, automatically they're a good person. He continues with saying that this tells you nothing about these people. He actually goes into it and he says, you have tons of people saying they're doing good things and they're actually doing good things in the name of God.
Yeah.
But it's laced with sin. It's laced with it. Equally so, you have lots of people working in banking and finance that are doing the good thing, the hard right. So he goes into there where he continues. Usually people who think this way about those polars, in their world, their behavior is always appropriate. Their behavior is always appropriate.
Yeah.
And he says, you can trick yourself into thinking you are working hard for your family, for your community, for your friends, while being seduced through ambition to neglect them. He continues with this quote that I liked. Understanding heroism and schmuckdom requires fewer Excel spreadsheets, more Dostoevsky, and the Book of Job.
Good.
So we were talking about Dostoevsky the other day. And I think this might have been one of the books where I just kept reading and his name kept coming. Like, I got to read this guy because I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
So a lady he cites a lot in these books is a Dorothy Sayers. She was a English writer.
Dorothy Sayers.
Sayers.
Yeah.
You can tell I read, but I don't actually speak about this stuff a lot. So a lot of her writing was between World War I and World War II, actually. That was her period, but English writer. So just want to give context because you might hear me mention her more than once. So he leads with this. The popular catchphrase today is that it's everybody's duty to serve the community. But there is, in fact, a paradox about working to serve the community, and that is this, that to aim directly at serving the community is to falsify the work. There are very good reasons. Continues. The moment you only think of serving other people, you begin to have a notion that other people owe you something for your pains. You begin to think that you have a claim on the community. You will begin to bargain for rewards, angle for applause, and to harbor a grievance if you are not appreciated. But if your mind is set upon serving the work, then you know you have nothing to look for. The only reward the work can give you is the satisfaction of beholding the perfection of the work itself. The work takes all, gives nothing but itself, and to serve the work is a labor of pure love. She finishes. The only true way of serving the community is to be truly in sympathy with the community.
Yeah.
To be oneself part of the community, and then to serve the work. It is the work that serves the community. The business of the worker is to serve the work. So if you're mad about those statements, go look for Dorothy. That was all Dorothy.
I'll give you another quote from Dorothy because it speaks to the work piece that is so important. And I think one thing that's really cool about believing that you're made in the image of a creative God whose creativity is so great that every single person is uniquely creative. And that's what it means to be creative. It's so unique that you're going to have something very specific and very definite, very personal to you that you'll be able to offer that no one else will be able to offer. And so if you're going to be you as your reflection of God, made in his image, that does mean that there's going to be something really unique. So you might not make the absolute best spaghetti, but your love, as being the mom of your children, for instance, is so uniquely and necessarily personal to you that it's the most exquisite meal that those kids are going to have from a mother, because you're their mother and you're making it for them. So there's something so specific and definite. That's what I'm trying to say. Very, very personal. So here's what Dorothy Sayers says about work. She says one's calling is that one area where you will not tolerate fundamental errors, where you will pursue it patiently, where you're not content to allow a second-rate performance to be committed. It's because it's so connected. It's like, oh, I have a vision for that. I'm wired up to see that it's so important that you make the spaghetti in this fashion. And if you don't, you're aghast, And it's so that's why that spaghetti meal is so great, because you're the ultimate spaghetti meal maker. And I think there's something about that. Like, your real calling comes out of who you really are, and offer that. Have you ever seen Babette's Feast, that movie?
No.
It's just a great movie. I think it's a French or Belgian. I'm not sure, but it's about this chef, this woman who's just an amazing chef, and she wants to create this meal. I can't remember all the details, like for somebody who's sick that she loves, and she ends up going to this community far, far away. She's a Michelin star, like top of the line chef. She makes this meal for all of these people who are very, very frugal. They're like a very strict sect of Christianity that doesn't feel you should indulge in anything that might be pleasurable, right?
Okay.
But so she's going to make this meal. They've never had anything even remotely like it. I don't think they even drink. So she makes this meal, and it's like a 9-course meal. And you look at it in the movie, the way they portray it, it just looks like mouth-wateringly good. Like, oh man, that must have been so, so tasty. And these people are blown away. They felt like they were tasting of the wedding supper of the Lamb at the end of the age or something like that. But you could see, like, just that one meal was so who she was, that even though it was just one meal, it was such a product of her love and her care for that work. It became the basis of a story. It became the basis of a movie. It became the basis of changing these people's lives. And so that's why I think the work is important. That is the way that you can serve the community, but not, again, in a servile way. Because if it's servile, it's a means to an end. And then you start to feel like you're just a means to an end. And somebody better pay you, damn it, because you're not being properly recognized and saluted and patted on the back. And that's servile. It's not creative. It's not generous. And that's the difference between a genuine work and something that's strictly duty filling,
So I think it's my last Dorothy quote. She talks about the opposite of what you just painted. So chapter 12, it talks about a new power for work. It actually leads in with Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart. That's the opener.
Yeah.
So there's a part where Dorothy talks about sloth. So Dorothy wrote a book called Creed or Chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an excerpt from that book where she's basically writing about the 7 sins, including acedia, 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 which
some people say acedia, yeah,
translated as sloth. So as she explains it, most people think of this as laziness, but she says this is a misnomer. And these are her words. This is a misnomer because laziness, the way we normally define sloth or think about it, is not the real nature of the condition. Acedia, she says, means a life driven by mere cost-benefit analysis of what's in it for me. She continues, acedia is the sin which believes in nothing, cares for nothing, enjoys nothing, loves nothing, hates nothing. finds purpose in nothing for which it will die. We have known far too well for many years this reality. The only thing perhaps we have not known is that it's actually a sin. And when I read that, I thought about a quote that we often said in the military. Actually, I had this on it doesn't matter what I had it on, but this was a quote I kept with me through my military time by John Stuart Mill. War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded state of morale and patriotic feeling, which thinks that nothing is worth a war, is much worse. And we don't have to go into the rest of it, but basically his point is war is ugly, but even uglier is someone who thinks that nothing is worth fighting for. Tying it back to Dorothy, is the person who thinks nothing is worth fighting for, nothing is worth dying for, nothing is worth sacrificing yourself higher to. It's so how you talked about where you should be. She engages there about where what is the opposite of that lostness. They continue quoting a little bit of our buddy C.S. Lewis here. So one of his stories, let me see, where did I have that there? Here we go. So I want to talk about this one, kind of ties into where you get lost and what it can do to you. So not even just that despair, but this is an anonymous quote from a doctor. It says, "It's easy to become extremely cynical about people and emotionally hardened to life. You see so much of the messy stuff of life and death that you feel your essential defense mechanism is to become emotionally detached and keep a distance in order to maintain your sanity."
Yeah. Yeah. And you're distancing yourself from people because they're just going to disappoint you. They have disappointed you. You're going to resign yourself from work because what's it mean anyway?
So he really digs in deep here of it's not good if you fall for these ideas that because whatever your reasoning, if you say the world is so messed up, I just have to believe in me, or I only care about me. I do cost benefit analysis where it's just about me. These are all really concerning traps. Another one he talks about near the end. I think this is Lord of the Rings here. When the ring goes on, you become the only real thing. You are a little dark, solid rock in a ghostly world. Everything else is vague and shadowy. And the author, Timothy Keller, then says, in some ways, our contemporary culture operates like the ring of power, magnifying the self-serving nature of sin in every human heart. It tells us in a myriad of ways that nobody has a right to tell us what is right or wrong about us, that in the end, there's no authority or standard higher than our choosing self. Our conscience and our needs are more real than anything outside of us. Yeah. There is nothing to which we should submit to, nothing that may trump our own happiness without our permission, and that there is nothing for which we should sacrifice our freedom. I'm looking at a world today of people about to grab their musket because they are being told to wear a mask. And when you hear their voicing, I think about this.
Yeah.
It is this idea that nothing ever is justified in usurping your personal wants, which might sound like a good idea at first, but if we're all doing this, what kind of world are we left with? Yeah. If your boss is treating you that way, coming back to how can you ever be valued if your boss is using the same attitude?
Well, that's why everybody's so lonely then, isn't it? Because you're not seeing why it's a community kindness, it's a community caring that's worth expressing and entering into, because the community that you're surrounded by are all people made in the image of God who are, I guess, potentially eternal beings made for glory. And if you really saw them for who they were, you would enjoy them and you would celebrate them and you'd care enough about them that wearing a mask, at least so that they're not anxious, if nothing else, but maybe so that they actually live a little bit longer, enjoy life a little bit longer, and become more fully who they're meant to be. You're going to see it in a different light.
If everybody can only see themselves, then we shouldn't be surprised that no one can see us. If everybody can only see themselves, it makes sense logically that no one can see us. Coming back to how work becomes fruitless. So this is Tolkien here.
Yeah.
Thorns and thistles, we seek to grow our food. We engage thorns and thistles when we're seeking to grow our food. We have to accept fruitlessness as part of life. He goes into a story of Niggle's tree. I actually go read this because I never heard of it before.
Oh,
so
yeah.
So I had to go back and read this. But just for everyone, Fast and Furious is the story of a painter who imagines this beautiful tree so they can see the image clearly in their head, but it's so beautiful they know they can never paint it, so they weep in sadness until they die, only to see the tree there in heaven. He tied this to Salieri, where again, if you can just accept that you will never be perfect and that things will never be perfect for you, it can be very freeing. It is freeing. It's an absolute freeing of yourself to live. It's almost like if you let that die, you can live.
And there's two benefits to that. I mean, one is that you actually do something, because the perfectionism keeps you from doing anything. So nobody's actually blessed. And you're never going to get a pat on the back if you're perfectionistic anyway. So even the lowest level goal of getting a pat on the back is not going to happen. So doing something is one thing. But then I think one of the things that we discover too is if you actually do something and you give it and you're sharing it with them, it doesn't have to be perfect if there's a connection. Like the mother who loves her child might not actually make the best spaghetti meal, but the love makes it in to the best spaghetti meal. I mean, my mom's spaghetti I thought was the best, and I still think it's the best. And I'm pretty sure that by some objective standard, it wasn't. But because I knew how much she loved me, and I knew that she knew that was my favorite meal, that was the best. It was the best. And so, but she did it. If she had felt like, oh man, it's just not good enough. It's not good enough for the 5-star Italian restaurant. So I'm not going to do it. It would never have happened. But the second thing I was going to say, like, at least if you start doing it, and we know this from innovation companies, people actually do create stuff that's breakthrough. You will be way more creative if you just start making stuff. You prototype. And this is how the best artists become the best artists. They just start making stuff even when it's immature. The only way you're going to become mature is if you take the humble place of being immature, take the humble place of learning from your mistakes, which is why there's a great quote from G.K. Chesterton. He says, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. And he doesn't mean like just do crap. He means like, if it's a really worthwhile thing to do, then do it and continue to grow into it. You're going to grow, you'll mature, you'll bloom, and the work that you are offering to other people will continue to get better and better.
So LinkedIn, I believe he's one of the LinkedIn, or Reid Hoffman is his name. So I'm pretty sure he's LinkedIn. I'll look it up in a second to make sure I'm not lying to everybody. But yeah, Reid Hoffman. So he had a quote very similar, but he's later, so he might have been inspired or influenced. He said, if you wait to release your idea, if you wait until you're not, if you release, here's how he says it. If you release your idea and you're not embarrassed, you waited too late. I did check. He is LinkedIn. So just think about that. He goes, if the first time you present your product or your idea, you're not embarrassed at the state that it's in, you waited too late. Because the idea is, if you truly believe you have something that can affect the world and do everything, we will always be better than you in examining it and getting it out to the world.
Yeah.
So that is the idea behind it. Like, if your idea truly is that big, by default, it's bigger than you. You owe the idea the room to grow, meaning get it outside of your head. I wanted to, so I skipped this part here. It's actually in the middle of the book because it was the hardest for me to personally grasp. So I've taken all the easier part. So he engages Christians and the things how they engage work that are not good. So he has two sections here where the first one, he talks about thin or legalistic views of sin. And he defines that as people who think that sin is just a series of discrete acts, meaning as long as you don't do those acts, then you don't have any sin. So they'll never say it, but they tell themselves, I'm a good person because I didn't do these things. He calls that the thin or legalistic view of sin.
Mm.
He says a more real view, which he actually got this from Kyle Idleman. He calls it the thick or theological view of sin, where you acknowledged a compulsive drive in your heart to produce idols. Whether you're just sitting there, whatever you're doing, acknowledging that your heart is always trying to make these false gods. He then continues on by saying that Christians do some things, and he puts them in boxes. So the first one he talks about, it's two versions of dualism. That's what he calls it. They're basically about disengaging from the world. So he says that's where Christians do this wall between secular and sacred. The first one he describes, and again, it took me a while to go through this, so hopefully I can communicate this. There's a Christian who can't see that sometimes work done by non-Christians has God's hand in it. Equally so, they can't see work done by Christians is distorted by sin.
Yeah.
The other group of dualist Christians, I made this term after reading through it. I call them the time box Christians, where I'm Christian on Sunday and maybe Wednesday night. So I made up the term time box Christians, but that's the other type of dualist Christian, where he says we have the Christians who just disengage in one of those two ways. We then have the ones that he talks about how they basically take things from the world and they strip it and water it down to fit into the church. So he talks about, so basically you just take whatever is the popular music and you dress it up and put it in the church. He talked about that, which I know is going to hit a lot of evangelicals and a sore spot.
Yeah.
And then he talks about the Christians who just they just choose not to engage. So they move through the world and through Christianity, and they almost act like there is no conflict. So what he goes to is this: we need a new compass. We need a new compass. He says ethics is great, but you need something bigger than ethics. And he says it because ethics requires what you'll notice with ethics is the larger the community engaging in the ethics, the better it works. He gives the example of corruption, where the more people that have this ethics of anti-corruption, the better it is for everybody. So his logic is the bigger the community, the better. Through Christianity, you get everybody. Through religion, you get everyone. You get the highest above you. That is that connection that he's arguing for. And that's what he means by, instead of focusing on people, focusing on that institution of the body, that collection of the body. He says that a righteous heart disadvantages themselves to advantage others, while the wicked are willing to disadvantage the community to advantage themselves. This is the danger of people. I'm gonna beat up on unions. Unions might say unions matter, and they should, in my opinion. The danger is when that group of people is willing to disadvantage the community to advantage themselves. That is why the bigger the institution that you're serving, the better.
This is an argument to work in a big business?
I don't think it's about business so much as bigger as you can. So I think what he's really saying is even your biggest business, what is that, Walmart? That's 2 million people.
Yeah.
There's 8 billion people. So I'm just going to paraphrase. I argue that if you work for God, you work for all 8 billion people on earth.
Okay, so what he's saying is engage at the highest level that you can.
Yes.
Have the most systemic effect possible.
Right. He says this again, tying back to idols. The foolish heart, blinded by its idols, does not learn from experience. I was rolling that one around a while.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to change, right? It's working for you, so you're not changing. So we've talked about the idol of comfort a lot, and that is one of the reasons you stay in your hermetically sealed pleasure dome. You know, you're not going to go out. Why bother risking the good life that you think you have? And
I think this is a big one for the church, especially of you can't disassociate from this world. The world matters. We're given no guidance that the world doesn't matter and that there's no purpose for us being here, and you're just supposed to just wait for the next step. We're not given that guidance.
yeah,
But you must find that path, that disciplined path of not being so extreme that you can't see how similar or the similarities, not being so Christian, legalist, Pharisee, that you can't see the similarities we have with the world, but also not being so passive that you can't see our differences from the world.
Mm.
It's almost like bumper bowling. You know, you're off the reservation if you are running around saying we're just the same in action and behavior and thoughts. You're also off the reservation if you're saying they're nothing like us. We're completely different. We're separate. There's nothing overlapping.
it's really good. Yeah, it makes me think of Solomon, and in the beginning of his when his father died, when King David died, Solomon's going to take over the kingdom, and he's got a huge job he's got gigantic shoes to fill, because David was a great king, beloved, and he's also been told he's going to have to build the new temple, the first temple in Jerusalem, and these are massive things, and he's overwhelmed by the task, and he basically says, I don't know what I'm doing. But the way that he says it, he says, help me, God, because I don't know. I feel like a child. I don't know how to go in or come out, which is an interesting expression. But what he's describing is what they were often saying about David is he would go out the gates and in the gates. And the gates is this connection with the world. You have your Jerusalem context, but then you go out and you engage the world, and the world comes into the gates and you go out of the gates of the city. It's a place where you decide who you're going to do treaties with. He just before he had made this prayer, he had just married the daughter of Pharaoh, so he bought some peace for his country. But the idea of going in and going out and knowing how to do that, knowing how to engage the world without losing who you are, and how to have sanctuary where you're supposed to have sanctuary, but also how to have permeable borders so that you have a healthy relationship. And you saw that eventually Solomon did have such a strong relationship with the world that he shared hospitality with the world like crazy. And his wisdom was sought by many other kingdoms. And he became a blessing in a way that Israel was always supposed to be a blessing. He let a little too much of the world sink into his heart, though, it says, because he married so many foreign wives to try, I suppose, probably to try and make peace, but it turned his heart a little bit away from the fullness of who he is, right? So he did mess with his integrity a little bit, or a lot. I don't know. That's for God to judge. But that's the right prayer, like how to go in and go out, to be who we are, to engage, to invite in with hospitality, and to share from the bounty of what we've received and what we've cultivated with the world, so that we have a really great community and a growing community.
I almost feel like we planned this. So you're talking about Solomon. So let's continue with wisdom. So I got a C.S. Lewis quote here. Mm-hmm. For the wise men of old, the cardinal problem had been how to conform the soul to reality. And the solution had been knowledge, self-discipline, and virtue. For applied science today, the problem is how to subdue reality to the wishes of men. The solution is a technique. Let's just put that in your head, that transition for what is wise. What is the path of seeking wisdom? Mm-hmm. Going from how to align yourself to the world to I'm going to use that word again, the audacity, or maybe more appropriate, the hubris, of trying to figure out how to align the world to you.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to mention a person I've never heard of before, but I keep coming across them, so I might get some of their work. Alasdair MacIntyre, in his book After Virtue.
Yeah.
And I quote, "All human actions are enacted narrative. All people are living out some mental story that gives their life meaning.
Mm.
Everyone assumes themselves as the protagonist. They're the good guy. There's no part of reality, however, where there's no hope. Because if you're the protagonist, that means that somebody is the antagonist. This is one of the first kernel places we go wrong.
Mm.
I would even dare say it's the first sin, where in order for you to be the protagonist, the other people are the antagonist, and therefore you have decided parts of the world are not worth saving. So how dare you? How dare you decide that parts of this world is not worth saving? So I want to tie us up here with this idea. To get on the right path with your work, to get peace, whole with yourself, your behavior, your activities. Step one, get your actions right, your day-to-day movements, how you talk to people, how you treat people. Get that in order first. Step two, what you speak and your heart. I think it's your head first. So first your actions, then your head. Be actively aware of what you're thinking. Take an active, deliberate stance on what you're thinking. So first, what you're doing, then what you're thinking. Because you can think that you want to punch a guy, but you cannot punch him. So first, work on not punching that guy. Second, work on not thinking about punching him. Just don't think about it. Think about something else. Sing a fun song.
Right.
From there, the idea is if you stop doing it and you stop thinking about it, your heart will change to somewhere else. Turn your heart towards something else. So that is what I am proposing with this. Change your behavior with work. Even if it's starting with, be disciplined. Observe the Sabbath. Even if it's something like that, observe the Sabbath.
Yeah.
From there, it is your thinking. Again, all these times where I said you had hubris, we had audacity. Challenge yourself to think about those things. If you're the protagonist, who are you thinking that you are such a person to decide they're the antagonist and the world would be better off without them? Who are you?
Yeah.
And then from there, our heart, like what is our heart pointed towards? What God? Is it a God with a capital G or a small letter G? Because you're serving something. Have some honesty and talk to yourself.
Yeah.
What are you serving? Are you that community leader that is deciding that the community owes you? The community has. I've seen that. I've had people confront me. I've had people say to me, I've been working here for 15 years. Why didn't you tell me about what's going on? It's not about the community. It's about them.
Right.
I don't like that guy, so I don't want to work with his program. We don't talk about how good the program is or its impact or its effect.
Yeah, it happens a lot of people in the helping professions, I think. It's a real big temptation to fall into that. Like you aren't giving me enough credit. You're not recognizing, you're not honoring my investment. I've given my whole life to this. Yeah, and all of a sudden you're listening to them and think, well, that was beautiful what you've done, but sure sounds like it is a lot about you. It's easy to fall into. It's easy to fall into. Pastors fall into it all the time.
The author, Timothy Keller, I had never heard this term before. He says whether you're doing it right or wrong, we all do this. He calls it reflective leadership. He says that often the artist with the most disdain for the public produces art that is, to put it mildly, lacking a great deal of beauty and hope. So however you feel about the world, that's usually what you put out into the world.
Yeah.
So coming back to your work, do you have the courage to realize that no matter what you think you're doing, that perception of you being the protagonist, whatever you feel about the world and the people around you, that is probably the kind of work you're putting out into the world. You could be a doctor, let's talk about it. You could be a police officer. You could every day get in a car that says protect and serve.
Yeah.
But if you hate people,
You're going to be.
if you hate people, you are putting hatred out into the world for people. It is not possible to wear a badge.
Mhm.
And if you hate people, do good for the people.
This is why I started with in creation that God starts it by communicating and calling it forth, right? He's communicating and he makes it happen. And then he invites us into that conversation with him and then with one another. First conversation Adam ever had with another human being is like, whoa, she's beautiful.
There's a police officer south of us.
Yeah.
He does a lot of community work. I mean, he's a police officer.
Yeah.
He does a lot of community work. He has I don't know if he's a legit I don't know if he's an actual 501(c), but he's a great community engagement. And he calls it My Father's Business. So he's a Christian.
Okay.
He talks about from the Bible a lot. I've been meaning to actually get him in on one of these calls or meeting him. I just haven't done it, but I'm saying it on this live stream now to hold me accountable. But he talked about that. He was talking as a current police officer to police officers. And that's what he said. If you are wearing the badge and you hate people, we need you to quit.
Because whatever's in there is going to come out. I mean, that's what the Lord says is like whatever's in your heart is going to come out of your mouth. But the thing is, our communication, as we've been saying in different ways, is a lot more than just what we say. It's what we do. It's like the mom makes the meal for the child. The way that she makes the meal and itself is a communication. And all of it is a response to God. And it's a response to who we're looking at. Do we really see them? Are we talking at them as if they're not really there and not really people with feelings or families or needs or vulnerabilities or hopes or aspirations? Or are they a thing? Or are they fit into we've talked about this before, like a profile that has to be treated this one boxy way? You're no longer communicating. You're no longer honoring the person in a conversation that they can participate in. And that's why I keep on saying, even work is communication. And
I don't think this even. If your work is not tied to an anchor, as something as steadfast as a faith, I argue that it is difficult to keep your work tied to anything. So maybe a person starts out, it's tied to people. But if it's only tied to people, it's not tied to something greater than people. People will let you down. People will let you down. They will make you unhappy. And you will wake up and you won't even be tied to the people anymore. To where, let's not even talk about police. There are people who are teaching children who shouldn't be around children. They don't like children. There are people who are working at a homeless shelter who don't like poor people. They shouldn't be there. Because even if you're putting that food every day, that disdain, that comes out.
You're changing the meaning. You're no longer I mean, if you talk to somebody who's insincere, all of a sudden you feel like the conversation is hollow, and you don't even know what's it about, what's going on here. On the other hand, you talk to somebody who's really all there, it changes everything. They might not. I remember talking to this one African bishop who's been through, like, he's almost lost his life so many times. He's in an environment
in Nigeria, yes.
Yeah, northern Nigeria, right? So he's in a lot of terrorist environments, and he's been at gunpoint, beaten up, nearly to death. His wife as well. His house has been burned down. I mean, it's just endless stories like that. And he would come and he would communicate things I've heard all my life, words, right? And I know the scriptures. But he'd sit down, he'd open up his Bible, and he'd start to speak, and I'd be like, I don't think I've ever really heard this before. I don't think I've ever heard spoken by somebody with such power. Like, you can see why the disciples said to Jesus, when you speak, it's like your words have life. Because I felt that when when Bishop, he's not an archbishop yet, but when Bishop Ben would speak, it just was like, man, it's just like sitting at the feet of Paul or Peter or somebody. I mean, he was just, but he was saying the same words. And so the meaning changes and the work changes depending upon the alignment of your heart with your speech and your actions. Yeah.
We kind of jumped around, but I'm looking at the list here. I feel like we covered everything except maybe Christ will come again to this earth. God is a value add. I think we kind of skirted on the side talking about idols, making yourself your God. But I think we covered everything pretty well from his big change from change to. And I feel like we gave a good setup here about if you focus on something too small, it takes you, the smaller the thing is you focus on, the further it takes you from where you want to go. So if you detach from God and you focus on just the people will let you down. You'll become that bitter, jaded detective. You'll become that school administrator that hates kids. You'll become that person. If you focus on something that's even less than a human, like money, you're that person that, well, you have two possible outcomes. If you're chasing money directly, I found those are the people who have the hardest time making money. We used to call it commission breath. People can smell commission breath. It's a bad smell. People run from it. So you're either a person who can't make it or you're a person who can make it. And because of the externality cost, so the way you make money, you just burn so many personal bridges and you create so much strife for yourself. You need more money to cover up the other damage that it does in your life. So either you have the materialism approach or you have the wasting hunger. I'm going to call it that. The wasting hunger when it comes to making money your focus. I'll give you a third one we don't talk about a lot, but me and you talked about ascetics. People who make their living God not having money. So coming back to our community service folks, I work for the community. I don't have anything. The community owes me because I've been working for 20 grand a year my whole life. They owe me. So we probably should roll that in there as well. But yeah, I feel that, do you feel there's something we missed?
I mean, I'm not sure because I haven't read the Tim Keller book. It seems like it'd be really good. I like a lot of the points that he makes here to the extent that I understand him. And I think in a way we did indirectly address the idea that Christ is going to come again, because we talked about how even in our short lives, or even in like Christ's own life, it could look like it was wasted. But, you know, he's not worried that Pilate was in charge because he sees that Pilate being in charge in that moment is all under his Father in heaven, and it's all for the joy that's set before him. So everything that's happening, Jesus is looking forward to that ultimate fulfillment, which then kind of is like it's like the sun that's rising just above the horizon. It's now starting to shine into here and now. When you realize how big the kingdom is and that it's coming, and whatever light we have, it's coming from that. And whatever shadows we still have, there's more light to come. And so there's a way in which I think we have at least implied in a lot of the stuff that we said. We've talked about how our little experience, our homes, our companies, our churches, our communities have to be seen within that larger context, because it gives you hope. It gives you hope, and it gives you perseverance and purpose, a lot of things.
It almost seems like if you can have the courage to let go of the things that you are fearful of now, immediately you have a hope. So if you accept the fact you're never going to do work that has glory through that, you know, because if you're fearing that, if that's putting you in despair, you're chasing something you can never have.
Yeah.
The moment you accept that you're chasing something you shouldn't be chasing, you instantly have this weight relief. It's actually a freeing thing. You know,
Yeah.
Because you're accepting a more true, you're accepting truth. Maybe that's just keep it simple.
Yeah.
You're abandoning falsehoods, you're abandoning idols for truth.
Yeah.
And to your point, you're not focusing on your individual. So yeah, I think we did cover everything here. Because Christian superiority is you making yourself the protagonist. That's why I say you don't have to be a Christian. If you are the protagonist, that's number 10. That's your thing you're doing there. You have a superiority complex.
Right.
Number 1 for individual salvation, your life's work is not required to satisfy you in your life. Maybe you are the person chiseling on that church is going to take 300 years. It's not for you. This could still change hearts, communities, and the world. Changing from being good to being saved. I tie that to Sabbath personally. A person who works around the clock might say, I'm doing the good thing. I'm working. No, that's not the definition of being saved.
Mm-hmm.
Saved is to obey. Part of obeying, take Sabbath. Rest. Cheap grace, that thin sin, that thin concept of sin versus the thick concept of sin. Because if you have the thin concept of sin, I didn't do anything bad today, so I'm good. You're not understanding the grace that was given you. You've cheapened grace.
Or even if you have done something bad, it's like, oh, it's okay. It doesn't really matter because I may as well just go ahead and enjoy whatever I want because he's gonna cover it anyway. Instead of thinking, well, wait a minute, he did cover everything, but because he covered everything, I now can participate in giving and being just like him and being a person of grace and sharing creativity and generosity and forgiveness with other people.
And I like the costly grace because let's articulate that costly grace. That even when you're sitting there asleep, your heart is growing new idols. Your heart's growing new ones, and he's covered you for that. What you're doing right now, the one you're building right now as we speak. Mm-hmm. So the God is a value add. I see that as our dualist Christians. If you're time boxing God, he's basically a value add.
Well, he's like it's like he's an ingredient in my kingdom.
Exactly. He's
participating in a greater context of his kingdom. Yeah.
Idols of the world we covered pretty well. The corporate idols, the cultural idols, and what was the other one? So we had the corporate idols, rank, status, power, salary. We had the cultural idols of reason, individualism, those are popular ones. And then traditional idols, my family, my race, my nation, statism, those kinds of things.
We should add in tribe these days.
Right? I should say tribe. From there, disdain for the world, whether you're the doctor who's just seen so much ugliness, whatever your reasonings, your justification or you're that other Christian we talked about. So we talked about the time box Christian. You're the Christian. It's like, well, that's so bad. I'm nothing like them. I'm just going to remove myself versus engaging. We talked about that one. We didn't specifically get into the bowling alone, but I know we talked about the lone Rambo, me and myself. Oh, we did talk about that.
Yeah.
We talked about if everybody's only focusing on themselves, why are we surprised that nobody can see us? Yeah. We talked about that.
Yeah, we talked about the private property distortions of a certain version of capitalism. Yeah.
So then from there, people matter versus institutions matter. The idea being find the highest thing to serve. So even though Walmart's 2 million people, there's a bigger thing you can serve than even Walmart. There's a bigger thing. Let's talk about that. America's not the biggest thing you can serve.
Yeah.
So honestly, everyone in the world is not even. I mean, it's not just this world. You can, because if you're just serving the people let you down. The people are moving, people are dynamic, and you can fall even into the traps of popularity.
We tend to oppose people and institutions in certain American philosophies, I would say, or Western philosophies. And what God has done is he's actually created certain institutions. He created the institution of marriage, created the institution of a people, created the institution of church, of government. He creates those contexts for people. People are eternal. There's going to be, I guess, a new institution kingdom to come that he's getting ready for us, but it's still an institution. But on earth, these are the institutions he's created for. You can't really even touch people's lives just by touching people. Yeah.
So I started at 10, but that was 10 through 9. So yeah, we I think we touched on it pretty well. We talked about the big 3 sections of the book I shared with you. The part 1, God's design for work. Then our problem with work, meaning our miscommunication of what we think work is and how we're doing it versus what it should be. And then finally, reconnecting to what is good work, what work should be like. So those are the big sections. And
yeah.
Well,
maybe tomorrow morning we can talk about calling with our group, and we can see if we can somehow record that. But we could talk about calling, how you come into a sense of calling. I was thinking maybe we could even take a look at Moses. Like, how did Moses come into his calling? Because he took a long way around to get to it. But
I think that'll be a great idea. So for those of you joining us tomorrow, you just heard what we said. We'll probably go big, bigger picture on this. But I think that's a great strategy. Let's talk about the problem. Let's start with the first half of the problem of work being fruitless, pointless. I say we stick with those two because selfish and idols can kind of distract us, even though we'll engage it. But let's start with work being fruitless and pointless, and then go back to what you're saying of that new story for work, that new concept, that new compass, and that new power.
Cool. Sounds good, man. Thank you.
All right, everybody. We just hit 2 hours. Thanks for giving us a listen, and enjoy your comments.